Do I sound okay?
Well, no better than usual, but
Yeah. Let's not complicate the question.
Oh no, let's complicate.
but but I think fine. You sound fine. I mean, the reason that Dean is asking about whether he sounds good or not is because this is the first time we're doing a totally remote podcast. It's it the last time you heard from us, we were sitting in the last several podcasts, we were sitting out under a tree and because of
Being
COVID.
attacked by squirrels
But,
and
creatures all over the place.
airplanes falling out of the sky.
Oh my.
True. All of that is true. And so it's it is certainly a pleasure to be in the warmth right now, since it is actually February. And I'm in Connecticut. And that is a cold place to be this February. As we are all in cold areas, so this is a much better situation for us. So,
And I'm in New York. And
Yep.
Tor, you're in the coldest place of all, aren't you?
I am. I'm in Maine.
Maine,
Mm.
Maine, lobster.
That's the only connection one makes with Maine,
That's it.
lobster, right?
Well,
That-
yeah.
What about moose? Shall we talk about stereotypes
Yeah.
today? Right? Lobster, moose. Okay, Maine, New York. I'll throw that one out.
I'm gonna go to food. Good
Cool.
pizza, great food, all over the place. Anything you want, you can get it practically
So
any
far-
time of the day or night,
There you go.
even now.
So far, food is a stereotype that's coming up in both. All right, and Connecticut.
Yeah. Well, you can still get good pizza. You can still get lobster. And after
Wow.
that, you're on your own. So, but we're not here really to talk just about that. And first of all, I'm Tom Peterson. Who are you?
And I'm Dean
Oh, my-
Foster.
Wow,
And-
I thought he'd stroked out on us, but he's back. Okay. And we've got
And
and oh okay. And oops, your culture's showing. Whoa, he's a little off there. All right, that's all right. And also, we've got Torin, who's with us today, and he's with us today too, but he's remote because we're all remote. I've been remote for years and years, I believe.
Told you that.
I know, often. So today, we're not going to whine about the cold because we've already whined about the cold. And what we will be looking to do.
One should always have, if it's a white wine, it should be cold.
Well, it should be, and if it is cold, then a nice red can be a nice warming.
Right, but I was
choice.
saying wine like.
I know what you were
with the-
saying.
Oh man! Oh.
My burden is I know what you're saying.
I see. That's probably the burden of all the listeners as well.
They do seem to remark on that, yes, but
You know what else they remarked on? I thought it was very interesting.
what is that, Dean?
After our last episode,
Yes.
where we were talking about the Baltics and the Balkans.
Yes. Oh,
you know,
yes. Where the difference is the commonality was the balls.
Yes, the common denominator was the balls,
There you
but
go.
but the difference depended on the ending,
Mhm.
right? The ands or the ticks.
That's
right?
it.
Okay. And we spend so much time on that juvenile issue that we never actually got to talk about the cultural things that were important and relevant and critical to know, which is why the listeners tune in. They don't tune in for Baltics and Balkans. They tune in for I know they're intelligent and curious listeners, and this is what they want, and we didn't give it to them.
Wow, you've got a lot better opinion of them than I do. I Just kidding. The
So I think we should jump right into all of that good cultural information about the Balkans and the Baltics that we clearly overlooked last time.
Well, that's true. We did. And I think we also shorted one of them. Torin, which one was that? Which was it, a tick or the cans that we kind of short changed last time? Do you remember?
Well, I think there was a lot of room to explore the cans in particular.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. We were more on our ticks than on our cans last time, and we were heavy on the shrooms, if I'm not mistaken.
That's for sure.
Well, the shrooms play a role in both the Baltics and the Balkans. Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. I think that. By the way, heavy on the shrooms is the way to go. I think that's definitely the way to go.
Whenever available, whenever
that's right.
possible. And I always wanted to take a mycology course.
Did you?
Yeah, one of the things, like, before we check out, before the final goodbye, it's like you want to look
a
back
bucket
and
list.
What's in your bucket list, right?
Okay.
And one of the things I think that was always in my bucket list, if I look down the list, I don't think it's up at the top, but if I look down the list somewhere in there, to understand how to forage mushrooms without killing myself. Like, which mushrooms, if I were in the forest, would you eat and which ones wouldn't? And I think you can do this if you take a mycology course. I don't think it's
well, I'm sure you could.
And one of the things we talked about last week was that this is very popular in the Baltics, particularly, and that everybody in the Baltics seems to know this stuff. I guess maybe they teach it in school. You take algebra, you take, English. Well, you don't take English. You take social studies. Like, you don't take social studies. Well, whatever.
Well, you might of some sort.
In the past, probably you took, Marxist ideology, but you also took a course on shrooms. I'm sure of it. If there's somebody listening from Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, let us know, please, if when you went to school, if you took a course on shrooms. Thank you very much.
I'm going to have to try to push us away from here just a little bit. I'm going to try to push us away from the dock a little bit. The dock. Yes, because in going in the direction of culture, because if I'm not mistaken, that's in the name of our show. And so I thought that what I would do is just say, it would seem to me that if harvesting mushrooms is a benefit to both of the cultures, that probably at the very least there is a built-in educational system from family to family as and generations as they come along about this is good to pick, this is not good to pick, that type of stuff. Would you say that would be a correct assessment, Mr. Foster?
It might be. I think there's a lot of organic information that we all learn in our culture that we grew up with. By the time we're 4 years old, we're speaking the language of our culture. There's a lot of inherent stuff that just develops organically in terms of knowledge that you learn, that you become this cultural being, depending on how you grow up. And all of that is given to us by our parents, by our teachers, by media, by the church. Yeah, sure. And maybe, I guess my question is understanding the difference about mushrooms part of that organic knowledge that one simply grows up with in the Baltics? Or is that something that is, something you actually have to learn in school? I don't know. Does grandma teach it to you, or do you actually officially learn it somewhere? Or maybe neither. Maybe I'm making an assumption that it exists more ubiquitously than it actually does. I don't know, which is why I'm hoping we have a Lithuanian, Latvian, or Estonian listener who can actually tell us.
Am I mistaken, or are you not the person who's supposed to be on here for the cultural aspects of it?
Well, I am, and I am fairly knowledgeable about this, but I am always willing to admit that there's more to learn, and I don't know how it's taught in that region.
I see. All right, fair enough. And is there a if the case is that you're not clear on that, then did you pick up anything while your time was there that you actually went on the adventure we talked about in the previous episode.
When I was in the Baltics,
Yeah.
no, because I was drinking far too much and I didn't
We're back to
remember
the
ask
wine
the
and
question.
etc. Yes. Okay.
I'm
That's fair.
I'm sure had I had my wits about me at some point, that would have been a question that emerged and I would have asked it. I'm a fairly curious person, but I never did.
I was thinking if it was normal times, which it clearly is not at this point in the winter of 2021, that you would be able to, perhaps if you chose, you would be able to go back over to the Baltics or the Balkans and get some education there on it, which might be the
I'm
best
sure
thing to do.
I hope I will. Yes. So are we disinviting any of the listeners who might be of the region to tell us this information?
No, absolutely not. We want them to
I
share
no,
their.
I think you're right.
Well, that's one in a row, right there.
Glad we solved that.
That's
No, I'm gonna jump off the cliff here and say, if you were about to tell us, please don't. Please don't, because on my next trip to Vilnius, I want to find out myself.
Well, I think it would be great if they would tell you where you could get that education. Maybe there's some people out there that have that information.
I'm sure at this point they will tell me exactly where to go.
I think they can tell you where to get it. That's for sure. Yeah. Or maybe where they'll give it to you. That might be the other thing.
But that's interesting. That's a cultural thing.
Is it a cultural thing?
Good. Because I did get that information when I was in the Balkans, and I have been to the Balkans much more frequently than the Baltics. I made several trips there, done quite a bit of work there, and so maybe because I was simply spent more time there, I did eventually get around to asking that kind of question. But it had nothing to do with mushrooms. It had, again, we're talking about the food being one of the stereotypes of culture. It had to do with the food if I remember correctly, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is today an independent nation in the Balkans.
Yes.
Not always was, and who knows about the future. This is a fractured place where nation states come and go depending on the politics of the moment. But right now, Bosnia-Herzegovina is an independent nation. And when I was there, the capital is Sarajevo. And Sarajevo plays an outsized role in 20th century history. And it's kind of a crucible of Balkan culture and the many complicated issues in the Balkans. And so Sarajevo, actually, somebody once said the 20th century began in Sarajevo and the 20th century ended in Sarajevo. And because at the beginning of in 1914, we had the assassination of the Archduke, the Habsburg Archduke in Sarajevo.
And the start of World War I.
And the start of it was the match that started World War I.
Right.
And in the 1990s, we had the Balkan Wars, which and the siege of Sarajevo. It was a horrible civil war going on. So, and we can talk about some of the reasons for that. But when I was there, talking about the food, I was given a plate of, I remember, well, some people called it cevapci. If you really loved it, you called it cevapcici. I guess that means it's kind of an affectionate way of referring to it.
What was that again?
Cevapcici. And I asked about it because these are little sausages, and they're not in a casing. They're just handmade, hand-rolled sausages. It can be made with lots of different kinds of spices. And if you order it, you get a big plate. So we were sitting outside and in a lovely cafe in Sarajevo, and I ordered a plate of cevapcici. And the way to eat it, one of the traditional ways, was to have it with a glass of milk. So now I've got all sorts of problems because, well, typically I don't eat meat anyway, red meat. Yeah. And this is a plate of sausages. You get like a mound of them. You get like 40 of them on a plate or something. And they're delicious, but I don't eat meat. but I'm there and I'm going to do it, and it's a national dish. And then the tradition is also to always have it with a glass of milk. So wait a minute, I don't drink milk. I even as a kid, I didn't like to drink milk. And in my tradition, drinking milk, a glass of milk with meat, just like I never. No, it just doesn't work. It's like dairy and meat. Not that I was raised kosher, I wasn't, but I don't know. I was raised where you just. I don't like that. So here I am with
perhaps with a kosher influence, though, over years of
yeah,
of exposure to that.
There was influence there. Actually, it isn't a milk. It's uh, you would look at it and it would look like a glass of milk. It was really like a glass of yogurt. It was like a glass of
thicker,
liquidy yogurt.
Liquidy yogurt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it lumpy at all?
Yeah, I don't remember it being lumpy. I remember it being very smooth.
Okay.
And tangy.
Okay. Really?
Not a sweet yogurt. No, nothing. They didn't add fruit to it or anything. This is natural stuff, and that was great. But that with the sausages, I don't know. So I started to ask about to the person next to me and the waiter, what is this? What, and they started to explain this to me. And yeah, sausages are a very big thing in Eastern Europe and Eastern and Central Europe, and every country's got its own sausages. And these were the sausages of Bosnia Herzegovina and the surrounding region. I mean, you have versions of cevacici in Serbia, even in Croatia, Macedonia, lots of the different various countries around it. Yeah, so that, I did ask the question then,
right?
But when it came to shrooms in the Baltics, I didn't get to it.
Okay. Well, so now tell me, this is you made the comment before of how this has been a fractured area, and that it probably will have that in its future in some form as well. But what is it about the Balkans and the Baltics that make him that way? Is there a cultural side that causes or at least adds to this?
Absolutely, it is the fundamental cause of it. What you have is this is a very good question, Tom, and
thank you.
This is the cultural thing.
I'm going to leave now, then.
And I'm sure, depending on where in the Balkans you are from, you're going your reaction to everything I'm about to say is probably going to be different. So, like if you were a Croat, and you might hear what I'm about to say as different from the way you would hear it if you were a Serb, and that's essentially part of the problem, that you have got these very, very different ethnicities, religious backgrounds, and historical experiences that make all of the different peoples in the Balkans historically, politically very, very, very. What's the word I'm looking for? Difficult to get along with.
Well put. Well put, sir.
And they often don't. And the simmering hostilities between these groups are they emerge over from time to time based on the politics of the moment.
And I'm guessing that those hostilities and feelings go back many, many generations.
Oh, centuries. We're talking about centuries. An event that happened in 1300 is still today resonating, and people have strong feelings about that. And if the politics of the moment are tipping the feelings in one direction or another, or if there are larger geopolitical forces that are taking sides with one side or another, and historically that's what's happened. Russia has sided with Serbia. Germany has sided with Croatia. You've got the Ottoman Turks would side with the Albanians and the Macedonians. So depending on the what's happening politically in the region, who's got the influence at the moment, you get these different hostilities that get supported, and so it breaks out into violent uprisings at times. So what you have, for example, from a linguistic perspective, just to give you some examples of these differences, you've got Serbs and you've got Croats. Now, they speak essentially the same language, and they're neighbors next to each other. The language in Croatia is Croatian. The language in Serbia is Serbian. The overall language is Serbo-Croatian or Croat-Serbian. And they mutually understand each other when they speak with each other, but they claim to speak two separate languages.
Oh, okay. Now, I'm sorry to interrupt, which I'm not, of course, as we've determined many, many times. Um, so we're talking about two separate languages, and then is there a third language that like combines the two languages so that they can speak to each other?
It is essentially the same language.
They're basically, they have the same language with possibly small exceptions.
Yes, there are small words here and there, but but if I'm a Serb and I speak to a Croat, they totally understand me. And if I'm a Croat and speak to a Serb, they totally understand me. But they will claim that we're speaking Serbian in Serbia and Croatian in Croatia, and that it's different.
Sure.
And when they write their languages, they write them in completely different script. The Croats write Croatian in the Western script, and the Serbs write it in Cyrillic, the Russian script. And that's really indicative of the influence of these larger powers, these larger civilizations on this small region, because Croats align with the West traditionally, and Rome, and Germans, and Germany, and their traditions come from the West. They're on the Adriatic coast. And you have Serbia, which is more interior, more Eastern, aligned with Russia and the Russian Empire.
Sure.
Now that split, that division also is represented religiously, because Croats are mainly Catholic and Serbs are mainly Eastern Orthodox. Because if you remember, the Roman Catholic Church split, and the split happened right in this region, in Constantinople.
Right.
So you had the establishment of the Eastern Church as opposed to the Roman Catholic Church.
Absolutely.
So you have Eastern Orthodoxy in Serbia and other parts of the Balkans, and then you've got Roman Catholic in other parts of the Balkans. And so all these differences play themselves out. They see themselves as very different people, when in fact they're all Slavs for the most part, except Romanians and Greeks. They're not Slavs. There are always exceptions in this region, but for the most part, they're both Slavs, but ethnically, but they see themselves as very, very different. And then the third element to complicate this picture were the Ottoman Turks, because when the Ottoman Turks came through, they were Muslim, and they came from Turkey, Istanbul, and then the next stop is the Balkans. And so there's a third group here, which are Muslim, Albanians, and many in Kosovo, and many in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Bosnia-Herzegovina is probably the most fractured area, because you've got a combination of Croats, you've got a combination of you have Roman Catholic, Muslim, and Eastern Orthodox, all supposedly living in harmony with each other,
or at least living with each other.
Yes, and of course, every now and then they don't.
Right. And as I would assume, as in most situations where you've got these, in essence, groups of people who are they are searching for their own identities, so they're holding on to certain cultural aspects which may or may not be benefiting them, and defining themselves from the other groups that they have traditionally realized were not the ones they wanted to be associated with, because basically they've been told that over the years. And there's political things to gain from doing those things or feeding that feeling one way or another. There were in 1300s, there are in the 2000s.
Right.
So is that a correct assumption on that, or is that?
That's right. And whatever's going on in the moment politically in the region, like are the Russians more influential? Is my local political representative representing the Russian the Russian story, the Russian narrative of the moment, or are in the past? The Habsburgs and the Germans more influential, or the Americans, in more recent times,
Sure.
or the Ottomans. I mean, who's got the voice? Whose narrative are we living under at the moment? Because that's who I either have to suck up to and get behind, or maybe fight against. And it's been historically a very, very difficult place. And even if you go there today, traveling around, speak to the people, um, lots of folks will talk about this, and they will talk about it as if this stuff is alive. And I mean,
Mm.
well, it is alive. You know, we checked. I remember checking into the hotel in Sarajevo. So here's the capital of Bosnia Herzegovina. And the city itself is fractured into these three groups. I remember checking into the hotel, and this is a lovely hotel, and it's been modernized for modern tourists, modern travelers. And in the walls of our hotel room were these massive bullet holes
Mm.
that was from the fighting that went on in the 1990s. And they left the bullet holes in the wall, I guess, as kind of a tribute to what had happened. And you walk through the streets, and you can see these wherever there were mortar shells that landed in the streets. Um, and this is just walking through downtown Sarajevo. They have painted over these mortar shell ruins with the sign of a rose, because the rose was always the symbol of the city of Sarajevo. And so wherever there's this mortar shell hole in the ground, in the sidewalk, essentially, or against the side of a building, it's painted with this red rose. I mean, this stuff is alive.
Yeah.
Very powerfully.
Very much so. It's it would seem, as we know, that Dean and I are old enough, barely old enough, but we can remember when portions of this area were consumed by other countries and created into other countries, Yugoslavia being one of them.
That's
and and so that you have less area that is independent in it making its decisions, and also Soviet Union's influence over them, over countries as well. So you had sort of some sort of federal, in essence, at least an assumed federal control over these things. And I would think, and that in those times when you have that, that almost feeds this independent fervor within the individuals in those different places, simply in the sense of the idea of it. I have to retain our independency, even though we've been swallowed up by this larger entity. And it would seem to me that would be true. Is it something that has kind of kindled all of this now that they have broken up and become smaller places to live?
Yeah. It's always in the past. It's broken up. It's come together. It's broken up. It's come together. Sometimes willingly, sometimes unwillingly, because larger powers forced it to go one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And people are conflicted about this. You know, for example, in the 19th century, there was this very strong pan-Slavic movement to unite all of these Slavic Balkan people into one, so that they could be a powerful nation or a powerful state against these larger powers of Germany and Russia and Turkey. And that was one of the reasons why Yugoslavia, in fact, was created. But at the same time, after World War I and World War II, these national differences that had to align with different groups could not stay together. And so they came apart for one reason or another. The latest example being the disintegration of Yugoslavia at the end of the 20th century into these smaller entities. Which, will they survive? I mean, they're small and very weak and not very strong and filled with problems. It's hard to say. If you're a visitor going there, there's lots of, you have to be sensitive to this stuff. I mean, there are no-nos and things you really should be aware of.
What would some of those be? What, when I get to the point, if the world ever allows me to go someplace again, and I go over to this area, I'm going to assume that I got to be a little careful about what I do or what I talk about when I'm there.
I think so. be aware of the fact that these are very warm and welcoming people for the most part. Like so many people are one-on-one, individual to individual. But people are sensitive to the outsiders' ignorance of the suffering that has gone on there, and at the very least, be humble. I think the safest thing to do is to be humble around what you don't know, um, and to simply ask questions as opposed to stating opinions, right? And don't assume who you're talking to. And just because you're in Serbia doesn't mean you're speaking to Serbs. Just because you're in Croatia doesn't mean you're speaking to Croats. And certainly, just because you're in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you don't know who you're talking to because it could be any of those three. And so, what you say about politics, about current events, about how do you live with your neighbor, do you get along? Well, you're Serb, so do you get along with your Croat neighbor? I mean, those kinds of questions are really tricky.
Yeah, so better to stay out of that if you can. Listen to what they have to say, like the advice that you've given for people around the world in many situations. It's better to be a listener than a speaker most of the time in those situations. But even with that, let me ask you if, and you may not know this at this point, but if there's although there's very little you don't know, so
very little, very little, but the little that the little that I don't know is very important.
If I'm traveling and I have to get someplace and I have to stop and ask someone in some form how I'm going to do that, I don't know. But let's assume I get someone who can speak a little bit of English at least. And I have a guidebook that helps me out with the language a little too. So we're going to talk about this. If I'm asking, let's say, about a town out ahead, or even I'm going to be leaving their area and going into one of the other areas, the pronunciations, things like that. Can I call things a certain thing, or I know there are areas of the world where in one space, if you say I'm going to this country, they'll get angry because they don't even think that country exists, or so there can be problems just with that, in a very innocent comment potentially, or question. Is there anything like that you can think of with the Balkans that maybe you should be aware of?
If you're traveling and you need to go somewhere, I would speak in terms of the city and not the country, because the country, depending on who you're talking to, may or may not be recognized by the person who you're speaking with. But the city is still the city; it's still the same. So if I were traveling to, through Bosnia Herzegovina, for example, there's an area which is it sees itself as very independent. It's the Republic of Serbia, but that's because there are a lot of Serbs in this area of Bosnia Herzegovina. If I'm traveling to the capital city of that area, I would talk about how to get to that city and not how to get to the Republic of Serbia, because that's an issue that some people say, yeah, we're an independent nation. Other people say, no, we're not. We're part of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Right.
In Macedonia, for example, which is an independent nation and recognized as such by most of the world, in Macedonia, which is just north of Greece and just south of Serbia, you have this disputed issue around the name of the country. If you go there and you call it Macedonia, the Greeks in Greece get very upset, because historically that meant that you were siding with the idea that this area is Greek. It's Macedonia, which should be part of Greece, because the northern part of Greece is referred to in Greece as Macedonia. So the solution was to recall, the United Nations actually changed the name, and the country agreed to refer to itself as the Republic of Skopje. Skopje being the capital city of Macedonia.
Hmm.
But
Okay.
in Macedonia, they weren't happy with that because that seemed like um, they they basically were agreeing with the Greeks, and they wanted to call themselves the Republic of Macedonia, but the Greeks didn't want that. So something as simple as a name becomes this flashpoint for
Yeah.
all of these differences. I mean, if I'm traveling to the region, something to be aware of is an interesting thing, I think, for US Americans and Western Europeans is that the traditional nod of the head up and down, when we go up and down, we're nodding our head. That usually means yes. It's a sign, it's a nonverbal sign of agreement.
Yes.
And then when you move your head from left to right, that typically means no. But in Albania, for example, and throughout the region, there's lots of other Albanian populations. In Kosovo, the majority of people are Albanian, and other parts of the region. If you move your head up and down as if to say yes, that means no. And if you move your head from side to side, which means no for the West, that means yes.
Okay. That could be problematic.
Yeah. So, if you're looking for confirmation of whether you're going in the right direction.
Well, Torin, you had a question, I think, about this, about Macedonia, right?
Yeah, I remember reading in the news somewhat recently, I believe, that there was a vote to change Macedonia's name to North Macedonia. Is that correct, Dean? Am I remembering that?
Yes, you are correct, and thanks for reminding me about that. To continue the story of the naming problem in Macedonia, there was a final resolution on this very recently. I think it happened last year, and it had to do with both sides agreeing to call the country, I believe, North Macedonia. And the Greeks, by the way, as I understand it, from some of my sources, were not really happy about this, but they agreed to it because, like all things get very political. They agreed to it because in exchange for agreeing to it, they were then able to get some benefits from the European Union that they couldn't get unless they were willing to make this agreement. So, it became a game of politics.
That's sort of the story of humankind, I believe, right
It
there.
is, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
It's now in the Balkan area. If I'm a visitor now from wherever I'm coming from, I realize the answer to this is yes to a degree, but I'm wondering about the importance of it. And that is if should I really put time in, for instance, knowing how to say the names of the cities the way they would be pronounced within the country itself? Is that something that's a good thing to put time into?
Look, I think, putting time into getting yourself educated to the complexities of the region is always beneficial. At the very least, it will give you context enough. It gives me context enough to know when I should shut up, as opposed to
wow, I've been looking for that for years.
As opposed to continuing down the road of madness, yeah. So that's always
too late.
Too late. Too late. This is wonderful. I'm giving you the long answer to your short question.
It's not new. Go ahead.
Do I typically do that?
But proceed.
Yeah, well, I think the safest thing to do, and the most important thing to do, my point in all this in this region, is to be humble. Ask questions in a respectful kind of way before you jump in and say things and do things that are just gonna you don't realize how problematic they might be. So be very, very humble, and I think that's going to be the most helpful thing that's going to get you on your way. Will you make mistakes? Sure, because there's so many sensitivities in this region. I mean, for example, as soon as you try to pronounce things the correct way or the regionally correct way, there's going to be somebody else 3 feet away who sees it completely differently. And because even though they're just 3 feet away, their traditions are from the opposite side. And they're going to hear you say it the way you think the other person says it. And then they're going to see you as on the side of the other person. And all of a sudden you're in the middle of this thing that you didn't mean to be in the middle of.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and they're also going to hear you say it as an American, and then that's going to predispose them to their ideas about what Americans are like, and some will be happy to see you, and some won't be happy to see you
Mm-hmm.
because America represents a particular position in the Balkans.
Okay. Well, in following your advice over the years, I have tried to learn the phrases "I am sorry" and "I am sorry that I don't speak your language well," in the local language, and so I'm thinking about the sorry part and what you're saying, and I think that all, of course, makes sense. But is being sorry, is being humble in that area, is that as much of an influential type of thing as it is in some others that we've discussed, where yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with a guy there, and I said I'm sorry. Essentially, we were in Sarajevo, and we're walking down the street, and there is a line in the sidewalk that typically represents the division of the city between the German influenced Habsburg, Viennese, 18th century. They were in charge of the region at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And right over that line, you can literally step over it. You're into the Ottoman Turks in the old city and the influence of the Turks and the Muslims. And that dividing line, really kind of said it all right there. And I remember having a conversation with this guy about it, and I said something like, "I'm sorry, I don't really understand all the history." And he said, "Why are you sorry? Why are you apologizing? You don't need to apologize." And he said, "You're not from this area. This didn't affect you directly, even though it was the source of World War One."
Mm-hmm. Yes, a little bit, yeah.
Right. And I don't think he was offended by my apology, but I also think that he found it naive. And it reinforced for me the fact that just by apologizing for not knowing was a kind of statement of privilege, and that he didn't care for it very much because it represented my privilege of not even having to know anything about what's happened here.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was offensive to him, as it should have been. I think one of the solutions is have as much Slivovitz as possible to drink. Because
which is a good solution anyway.
A very good solution, up to a point. Then it becomes problematic again.
Just the right amount.
Yes, that's true.
I should clarify that Slivovitz is a very clear, potent liquor that's drunk throughout the region. It's basically an eau de vie, a kind of dry brandy that's made from plums, from the local plums that grow throughout the region. And so it's like a plum brandy, but it's not sweet, like a plum vodka almost. And it's everybody drinks it. I mean, and so yeah, drink the beer, go out for toasts, go out for drinks. You'll always be invited to, and that does make these kinds of discussions a lot easier.
Yes, but I think you're right. Up to a point, it does. Yes, and then you got to be careful how easy it becomes. Yes,
right. So there's the Slivovitz, and there's also the rakia. That's another version of a local.
I saw that movie.
Rakia.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That was the guy who did the. No, you're talking about. Oh man.
Welcome back.
No, that was all inside my head. I'm sorry.
It wasn't, but that's just for a point for you to know. I'm sorry. I had to go there. It was a stupid joke, and therefore I needed to say it. Go right ahead, Rakia.
Yeah, rakia is like this licorice tasting liquor. In Turkey they call it arak. but it's I think it's known as rakia in the Balkans. Really potent stuff. I mean, if you have a plate of cevapcici and your yogurt drink and rakia,
you're
I
set.
think you're good.
So let me ask you now, just to make this thing come full circle as we're wont to do, or pray we're going to get there somehow.
If it ends up in the shape of a circle, we're lucky.
You're very lucky.
Oftentimes it's a rhombus
or amoeba-like, perhaps.
Yes. A trapezoidal amoeba. It's like a coronavirus or something.
Trapezoidal amoeba. I think that was the name of a band I had in college.
Group. It was a 60s group.
Oh, was it? Yes. Listen. So anyway, bringing it back together, as is, I guess, my role in this craziness. When you were, we last left you ruminating over the either liquid yogurt or thick milk and the sausage, and so I'm wondering if the rakia got you to or something like that got you to go ahead and consume this stuff, or if you just went ahead and did it, or you didn't do it.
If I remember correctly, and I may not be remembering correctly depending on how much rakia I had, but if I remember correctly, I went ahead and did it because you're pretty adventurous with food, and I'll do it anyway.
Yes, you are.
I'll try anything once. So I think, but I remember it was hard. I enjoyed the cevapcici. I liked the yogurt drink, but putting them together, man. But the rakia helped. It helped.
So you did. So there was a little bit of an assist on the part of the rakia then. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's fair. I think that's fair and appropriate.
And now, a safer food to eat if this is an issue for you is the burek. The burek are like these little savory pies, little pasties. They're filled with. They could be filled with meat. They could be filled with veggies. So you're going to get a veggie burek if that's what you want.
This is sounding very good.
Yeah, and they're really tasty and they're spiced. So grandma down the street makes hers one way, and then somebody else makes hers a different way, and they're tasty. Give you a whole plate full of them. Yeah. So you try the burek too. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's definitely. All right.
We should do these with all this stuff in front of us, so that we're eating and talking.
So we're consuming it. Yeah. Well, I'm on board with that, except we can't even get us in front of us right now.
Fair.
Although I will say this, and this is very topical, but also it really dates what we're doing right now for anyone listening in the future. Ooh. It's that I have received, and I believe you have too, our first vaccination shot.
You got yours
for COVID-19. I did the other night, and I do have to say, and I hope more people hear this. I just hope a lot of people hear this, but they're here with these people with these kind of makeshift sort of tent areas, and I'm literally in a snowstorm in my car. So I'm doing okay because other than having to get there, which was difficult, I'm in this car and I'm warm. But these people are dressed like they've going to their, it's an Arctic expedition or something, which it basically was. And they're coming out just to check, the documentation and those kinds of things. And several of them, at least, are volunteers. And it just was it was actually kind of moving to see these people willing to do this in the middle of all this, not to mention the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, which is why they're there. But there's also that. And yes, I know they've got the gear on and everything like that. Still, I couldn't thank them enough. It was truly an amazing thing to experience, to go through. And I tried to thank them all, and I think they just wanted me to keep the car moving as fast as I could to get out of there.
Yeah.
But it was truly an amazing situation, and I appreciate every single one of those people out there wherever they are. And I think now in a lot of the southern United States, at least, we're going through an abnormal, I guess, cold spell that is creating a lot of issues, and in some cases they've had to cancel things, but in others, I know there's people out there in incredible situations doing a lot of really good work right now. So anyway, if you're one of those people or know one of those people, please thank them for us, because I think it's an astoundingly generous thing to do.
Yeah, I think that can't be said enough. I'm glad you said that.
And on that note, I just am glad that we were able to remotely get together at least a little bit, because this has been fun, and I think a little educational. Dean, as always, thank you for your insights and your outsights and everything else in between.
And my lack of sight too. Let's be humble.
All right. Well, thank you, and we will be back again as soon as we possibly can with everyone. And I do once again just want to say we apologize for the quality of the audio on this one. We like to think that our audio is really very nice on this, but this is the first time I think we've really had to compromise, and I think that's pretty good in this day and time.
I think we got through it okay.
Not too bad. As before, I'm still Tom Peterson.
And I'm Dean Foster. And
Oops, your culture show. And smell ya. Okay, listen, the way to get hold of us is oopscultureshow@gmail.com. And our Twitter handle is oopscultureshow. Whether this is the first episode or the third episode or whatever episode that you've listened to, you should really subscribe. That's the best way to go, really, honestly. I know what I'm talking about. All right, so just subscribe through iTunes or through wherever you get your podcasts from. Subscribe. Thank you.